Let's be honest here. Sometimes when you're trying to focus, it feels like you're trying to kickbox a kangaroo.
Dog.
Look at him.
And
No, put him up, put him up. Here we go. Oh!
In short, it's impossible. Today, let's change that, and I'll show you 4 proven ways on how to focus much better to make sure that focus is never on your list of problems ever again. First, before we talk about focus, we need to learn why focusing in the world today is so difficult. And it all comes down to dopamine. The main causes and places where dopamine gets depleted today for every one of us is things like social media, websites, different news outlets, and even notifications that are constantly draining us. And when we go on our phone and allow us to engage with these, we're depleting our dopamine and making focusing much harder for ourselves. Pairing that with the switching of different apps and different tasks throughout your day makes it even more difficult. With this, a lot of people are getting, quote, diagnosed with ADHD, when in fact it is just this dopamine depletion caused by social media and other very reward stimulating pathways that is your phone and websites and other things to distract you when you are trying to focus. So before you turn to stimulant drugs or other drugs related to ADHD, be sure to see a professional and make sure that it's really right for you.
Stop it. Get some help.
So in essence here, we need to find a way to ground ourselves in order to find that focus once again. It's something that's so rare in today's world that it'll absolutely make you stand out, and employers and everyone will be wanting you to work for them and do work for them if you're able to focus and produce at a higher level. I also quickly wanted to touch on ADHD in general because I have several people that are important to me in my life that suffer from ADHD, to make sure that there are no misconceptions and no overlapping information in terms of people that might have ADHD versus people that definitely have ADHD. Something really interesting that I ran into was a Huberman Lab clip that explained that focus is not the problem. It's more so what we are focusing on. And again, it comes down to social media that's disrupting this. Interestingly enough, he also explains that drugs like Adderall and other stimulants only act to reduce fatigue. They don't actually improve focus. So focus is something that's inherent within the individual and something you need to learn, whereas fatigue is often caused by multiple hours of focusing, so it can help you keep going if your focus habits are already in place, but it won't just build focus off of nothing. The very interesting thing about ADHD, and I've done a lot of research about this, people that suffer from this have certain things that they focus on that they are able to, quote, hyper focus on. And this is a really interesting idea where a lot of things even if they find it remotely not interesting, they can't focus whatsoever on that. But as soon as they find something that they're passionate about or something they really care about, they're able to dive headfirst into it and just go into this zone, this flow state, if you will, and just go at it for hours without even blinking, and they're able to focus so well. So then ADHD is not really about focus in the right areas, of course. So this is where Huberman explains that ADHD is not so much linked with focus, it's linked with these things called attentional blinks. And if you don't know what these are, it's essentially when one task is being engaged with, it's when another stimulus is presented. So for example, what he used is when you're driving a car and something happens on the side of the road, somebody with ADHD is much less likely to notice that because they are hyper-focused on their driving than somebody who does not have ADHD. So it's this attentional blink that is what's the difference between people that suffer from ADHD and people that do not. It's not necessarily the focus aspect. And another reason why it seems like they're not able to focus on other things when they're hyper-focused is because of that over-focus on that one thing that they really care about, so that distractibility becomes much easier for them since it's constantly in their mind and they're wanting to focus on that one thing. When other people are talking about other topics or other things that are going on, they just aren't as interested and not able to focus on it because they're so attentive to that one task. What struck me as really interesting is after this whole breakdown of ADHD and focus, Huberman provides this idea that ADHD can be made a lot better and focus can be improved significantly by a one-time 17-minute period in which you sit down and just become introspective, thinking about your feelings and how you're feeling, thinking about your thoughts, very similar to a meditation, but he doesn't like to call it that because it's not quite the same thing.
A simple practice of taking 17 minutes, sitting and paying attention to your internal state, just interocepting, registering your breathing, registering the contact of your skin with whatever surface you're on, can forever rewire your brain to be able to attend better.
But just thinking about your breathing, thinking about your inner self, thinking about your thoughts, just kind of sitting there and thinking for 17 minutes, although it may be difficult, he says even just one time doing this can change your entire focus, which is pretty crazy. All right, so it's taken long enough in the intro here, but thank you guys for coming back. I've been moving the last 2 weeks, so I'm back here this week with a great video here on focus. So let's dive into tip number 1, and that is the 60-second rule. This is a super powerful one. You might be familiar with the idea that if you want to hear something a bit better or focus your hearing, Huberman proposed this idea that cognitive focus, that is focus of thinking and focus, can be caused by visual focus and training the visual cues. Let me explain what that means. So in this experiment, sitting at a screen or whatever you're focusing on, at the same distance you're going to be working, looking at a single point on your page or on your screen and looking at it for 60 seconds straight and not blinking, as little as you can, that is, taking the time to just stare at that one spot. It's been proven by Huberman and other scientists that looking around and darting your eyes every which way causes a lot of anxiety and a lot of unrest and a lot of unfocus. So by focusing your visual attention on a certain area of the spot that you're working on, it allows your brain to focus on that single task. And since your visual attention isn't moving, this is able to improve your focus. This is a great tip for if you're somebody who overthinks a lot and has a hard time getting started on something. Just sitting down first and staring at exactly the spot that you're going to be working on. Just doing this 60-second rule before you get started. The second tip that's also been proven to be very powerful is to avoid overstimulation and at the same time lowering your dopamine threshold as a result. Overstimulation doesn't just have to be visually or auditory or even mentally. It can be any one of these three, and it pretty much just speaks to your distractibility when you have a lot of things going on. For example, you might be familiar with the idea if you have multiple competing deadlines when you're in school, or for work if you have multiple projects, these can take up your mental space very easily, especially if you're just working on that first one. You're thinking about those other one or two, and it can really distract you and impede focus. This is why when you're at a coffee shop or at a library, you're able to focus so much better because there's a lot less distraction. I'd also advise you, if you're at one of these places, to avoid a place where a lot of people are walking by, where there's a lot of movement in the background, or if you have a lot of visual stimulus in the background. So try to avoid these places. The best is sitting at like a cubicle at a library, or if you're at a coffee shop, sitting in a corner where there's minimal movement. This will increase your focus ability even more. If you're at home and you don't want to go out, that's completely fine. Just the typical things: avoid your phone, sit somewhere where you don't have any browsers open or another computer or other things that can distract you, and just kind of lock yourself in a little area where you're just focusing, and that's kind of your designated spot. That'll help a lot. And kind of linked to this and overstimulation, just stimulation by itself is also very important to avoid, especially if you're doing something like the Pomodoro technique, which I'll link a timer in the description here that you can use. Essentially, it's a 20-minute work block followed by a 5-minute break, then another 20-minute work block, 5-minute break, and then 30-minute work block, and then 30-minute break. And this kind of repeats, so you can do it as long as you want, but essentially this has been proven to be very powerful in stimulating focus and having these focused blocks where you don't get too tired. But what you want to do here in those 5-minute breaks and even that 30-minute break is to not grab your phone and overstimulate your brain, because this is going to raise your dopamine threshold. Instead, go for a walk or make a meal, make a snack, talk to your loved one, but don't go on your phone or do anything very stimulating at the times that you're wanting to focus, because doing that task will be much more enticing if your dopamine threshold is kept lower. The third tip that I have for you today is to block regular work sessions in order to build a habit of focus. And something a lot of people don't realize is that focus is a skill. It's something you have to practice, much like you have to practice meditating or or playing guitar or going to the gym. It takes time to build it as a habit and also to build the skill of focusing. So don't be too harsh with yourself at the start, and start with as little as 2 minutes each and every day. I came across a video that did this in a very interesting way. He said to simply just sit down and do 2 minutes of work. Set a timer, open your computer or whatever you're working on, do 2 minutes of focus work, and then as soon as the timer goes off, close your computer, stop what you're doing. That's it for the day.
I'd sit down, open my laptop, study for 2 minutes, and then close my laptop and went to do something else. It seems unproductive at first, right? It seems stupid, but staying consistent with this 2-minute routine day after day meant that I was becoming the type of person who studies daily.
And then do this for a week or 2 or 3 weeks, whatever you need, and then this habit has already been established to show up every day. And then once you have that habit in place, you can then start increasing the amount of time that you're spending on that task each and every day. Increase to 5 minutes, increase to 10 minutes, so on and so forth, until you're at a spot where you're doing 1 to 2 to 3 hours per day without even thinking about it, because you built this little habit starting at 2 minutes. For this to be the most effective, it works best to do this at the exact same time every day. Maybe plus or minus an hour is best, but do it at a time where you're most likely to do it every day. For me, it's around 9 p.m. to just sit down and have that block of work time and focus time, and doing this every single day will make it a lot easier to do so. Block it off in your calendar too. Make it like a block, like a meeting with yourself that you can stick to and you need to show up for. And the last tip I have for you today is to limit your task switching. And this is due to something called attention residue that builds up over time as you switch to different tasks. This is a concept I learned from the book Deep Work, and it is a very powerful book by Cal Newport. And so the idea of attention residue is that when we finish working on a cognitively demanding task, when we switch to a new task, there's this residue, so to speak, that sticks around of that other task that's impeding our ability to focus on this new task. There was a study done by University of California, Irvine, that studied people in the workplace and used blockers for both cell phones in the workplace and also websites that people visited very often, such as social media or news sites. And almost all of the participants noticed that they were much more focused and had massive increases in their productivity at work versus the week before when they didn't have these blockers in place. A few participants also noted that they got rid of this interesting phenomenon called rabbit holing, where if they've switched to one of these websites beforehand, it would often lead to a chain of events that would get them checking all kinds of different sources. For example, one of them said they checked the news and then they would read a story about something, then do a bit of extra research about it, and then look on Facebook to see if it had been mentioned on there by some of their friends. Doing this allowed people to focus a lot longer and be more productive. A second study from the University of Minnesota also saw that there was a large increase in the amount of time that it takes to switch from one task to another, and this is even accounting for the fact that the task beforehand was completed. It still was part of the cognitive processes going on in the background, and so it distracted from the current task at hand. If you do have to do multiple tasks in a day and that are all cognitively demanding and you have to work on multiple priorities, the best is to just focus on one thing first, the most important, focus on it intensely, use the Pomodoro focus technique and the timer that I linked below, and then take a break, a significant break, do something very low stimulation, and then start a new task after a short break. This will definitely help with that attention residue. So that's it. Those are the 4 tips. Make sure to try all of them and leave it down below which one worked the best for you so that other people can learn as well. And of course, leave your focus tips. If you've heard ones that I haven't mentioned here, feel free to leave them down below as well.